The alien marketplace was alive with noise and cruelty. Traders shouted their prices, shackles clinked, and beings of every shape and color moved in chains. The smell of rust and fear filled the air. Beneath glowing lanterns, the auction stage gleamed like a stage for despair. On it stood 3 alien girls, their heads lowered, their wrists bound in iron. They were young, fragile, and trembling. Each bore the marks of mistreatment, thin scars, bruises, and the hollow eyes of those who had been told their worth was nothing. The crowd gathered, filled with merchants, mercenaries, and nobles. Voices rose, "I'll pay for the tall one. The small one will fetch a fine price for work. They're weak, but still worth the coin." The auctioneer raised his voice above them all. 3 Kalari maidens, strong enough to serve, young enough to obey. Who will start the bidding? At the edge of the crowd, an old man watched. His beard was gray, his shoulders hunched, but his eyes, sharp human eyes, burned with quiet fire. His name was Elias. He had seen much in his long life. Wars that shattered planets, treaties signed and broken, and humans spread across the stars. But nothing hardened him more than the sight of children sold like cattle. He stepped forward. "I'll take them all." The crowd turned, murmuring in surprise. Elias looked nothing like the other buyers. His clothes were plain, his weapons old, and his age made him seem out of place among the wealthy bidders. The auctioneer laughed. "All 3? Old man, do you even have the credits?" Elias dropped a pouch on the platform. The clinking sound of coins and crystals silenced the laughter. "That enough?" The auctioneer's grin widened. "More than enough, sold!" The crowd jeered and whispered. "What will a human do with 3 alien girls?" "Disgusting. He'll break them. Old fool, he won't last a week." The alien girls were dragged forward, their chains thrust into Elias's hands. They flinched at his touch, their eyes wide with fear. Elias led them away from the stage, past the sneers of the crowd, into the quieter streets of the city. The girls followed silently, expecting the worst. At last, he stopped in a shadowed alley. With a deep breath, he pulled a small key from his coat and unlocked their shackles one by one. The first girl gasped as the chain fell from her wrists. The second stepped back, confused. The third clutched her bruised hands, whispering, "Why?" Elias's voice was low but steady. "Because chains were never meant for you. You're free now." They stared at him, stunned. He reached into his satchel and handed them pieces of bread and water. "Eat. Rest. I won't harm you." The tallest girl, her eyes glowing faintly blue, finally spoke. "You bought us. Why free us? Our people call humans greedy, cruel, like the rest." Elias's lips curved into a sad smile. "Maybe most are. But I've lived long enough to know better. Life isn't measured by what you take, it's measured by what you give." The girls exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from fear to disbelief. But freedom was not simple. The girls had nowhere to go. Their families had abandoned them, their homeworlds destroyed or enslaved. They were free, yes, but also lost. The smallest, a fragile child with silver markings on her skin, whispered, "If we leave, we die. If we stay, we are nothing. What do we do now?" Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Then stay with me. I've got little to give, food, shelter, safety. But I'll not let you starve." The tallest narrowed her eyes. "Why risk yourself for us?" Elias met her gaze, steady. "Because someone has to. And maybe I'm the only fool left old enough to try." The girls didn't answer right away. They huddled together, whispering in their own tongue. Finally, the middle one, quiet until now, looked up at him. "If we go with you, you will not sell us again?" Elias shook his head firmly. "Never." Her eyes softened with something he hadn't expected, trust. "Then we will follow." As night fell, Elias led them out of the city, away from the lights of the market and the noise of greed. The stars stretched endless above, silent witnesses to their fragile beginning. The old human had purchased them to free them. That was his only plan. But as he glanced back at their faces, tired, frightened, but alive, he realized something unexpected. They weren't just survivors. They were the start of something new, and though he didn't yet know it, fate had far more in store for them than freedom. The girls followed Elias in silence as he led them through the valley. Dawn light spilled across the hills, painting them gold. In the distance, a small farmhouse sat low against the earth, its roof patched with metal sheets, its fence half broken but standing. Smoke curled from the crooked chimney, carrying the faint smell of burning wood. "This is my home," Elias said simply, stopping at the gate. The girls stared. They had expected a prison, maybe even a den of cruelty, not this. An old, tired house that looked as if it had weathered more storms than its owner. Inside, the house was plain but warm. Tools lined the walls, shelves sagged with jars of dried fruit and grains, and a single table stood in the center. The girls hesitated at the doorway, unwilling to step further. Elias noticed. He set down his pack and gestured with a hand that shook faintly with age. "No chains here, no orders. Just sit." Cautiously, they entered. The youngest, a girl with silver markings glowing faintly on her skin, perched at the edge of a chair. The others followed, huddled close, eyes darting to every sound. Elias moved slowly, deliberately. He brought out bread, cheese, and clean water, placing them on the table. "Eat," he said softly. At first they stared in disbelief, but hunger soon overpowered fear. They ate quickly, their hands trembling as if the food might vanish if they paused. Elias didn't stop them. He only refilled the water and quietly said, "There's more." Over the next few days, life fell into a rhythm. Elias worked the small garden, repaired fences, and tended to chickens. The girls watched from a distance at first, whispering in their own tongue. They did not understand why he gave them food without demand, why he let them sleep in his own spare room without locking the door. Suspicion clung to them like a shadow. One morning, the tallest girl, her blue eyes sharp with pride, confronted him. "Why do you do this? Humans do not give without wanting." Elias wiped sweat from his brow, leaning on his shovel. "I don't want anything." Her gaze narrowed. "Then you are lying." He met her eyes, steady and unflinching. "I am too old to waste time lying. You deserve more than chains. That's reason enough." The girl said nothing, but her silence held less anger than before. The neighbors, however, were not silent. Word of Elias's purchase spread quickly. When he visited the market for supplies, whispers followed him. "Old fool wasting coin on aliens. He'll regret it. Girls like that always turn. Or maybe he's lonely." Elias ignored them. He had weathered worse from men and worse from war. But when he returned home, he found the girls tense, their eyes downcast. They had heard the whispers too. "You do not have to carry shame for me," Elias told them, his voice firm. "Let them talk. Their words are wind. What matters is what we choose here." The smallest girl whispered, "But what if they hate us?" Elias sat beside her, his old hands rough but gentle as he placed one over hers. "Then we live in spite of their hate. That is strength." Slowly, the girls began to change. The silver-marked child laughed for the first time when Elias showed her how to feed the chickens. The quiet middle sister started helping in the garden, her hands clumsy but determined. Even the tall, proud one began to sit at the table without suspicion, though her sharp eyes never fully softened. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Elias sat on the porch sharpening his old knife. The three girls sat together on the steps, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. The middle one broke the silence. "If we had been bought by anyone else, we would still be in chains," the eldest frowned. "Perhaps worse." The youngest looked at Elias, her silver eyes glowing faintly. "Why did you choose us?" Elias set down the knife, his voice quiet but steady. "Because no one else would. And sometimes, that's reason enough." The girls exchanged glances, and for the first time none of them doubted his words. That night, as they lay in their beds, the girls whispered among themselves. They still carried scars, fears, and memories too heavy to share. But in the silence of the farmhouse, with the warmth of food in their bellies and no chains on their wrists, they began to feel something new. Not freedom, not yet, but the first fragile steps toward trust. The valley was quiet that morning, the mist still hanging low over the fields. Elias tended to his garden, kneeling by the rows of herbs while the girls lingered nearby. The youngest chased a chicken across the yard, her silver markings catching the sunlight. For the first time since their chains had fallen, she laughed, a soft, hesitant sound as though afraid joy might be stolen away again. Elias smiled faintly as he straightened, leaning on his hoe. His house, once silent and lonely, now held voices and life again, but deep down he knew peace was fragile, and in a world like this nothing good went unnoticed for long. By midday, dust rose on the horizon. Engines growled, carrying the bitter sound of raider machines. The tall girl saw it first. Her blue eyes sharpened. "They are coming." Elias's heart sank. Raiders, the kind who trafficked lives for coin, who smelled weakness like wolves scenting blood. Someone in the city must have spoken. Word had traveled. An old human had purchased alien girls and hidden. An old human had purchased alien girls and hidden them away. Inside, Elias ordered quickly, his voice firm. The girls obeyed, slipping into the farmhouse, though fear widened their eyes. Elias took his rifle from above the mantel, its metal worn but still reliable, and stepped onto the porch. His hands shook with age, but his gaze was steady. The raiders arrived in a storm of dust and noise, their bikes circling the farmhouse like predators. Their leader dismounted first, a broad-shouldered alien with jagged scars down his cheek. He sneered at Elias. "Old man," he called, "we've heard you bought 3 prizes. Thought you might share. Hand them over and maybe we won't burn your little farm." Elias rested the rifle across his arm. "Not for sale." The raiders laughed, the sound harsh and cruel. "Not for sale? Everything is for sale. Especially slaves." "They aren't slaves anymore," Elias said, his voice low but carrying. "They're free, and I'll kill the first man who tries to touch them." The leader's grin widened, sharp as a blade. "You an old sack of bones? You'll be dust before you can pull that trigger." Elias's finger tightened on the rifle's worn grip. "Try me." Inside, the girls crouched by the window, their hearts pounding as they watched. "He will die," the eldest whispered. "They will cut him down." But the middle sister shook her head, eyes wide. "He does not shake. Look, he stands like a wall." The youngest trembled, clutching the hem of her dress. "If he dies because of us?" They fell silent, fear twisting in their throats. The raiders moved closer, circling. One raised his weapon, a jagged blade gleaming in the sun. Elias's old rifle barked once, the shot cracking through the valley. The raider dropped, his weapon clattering to the ground. The circle broke. The others growled, anger flashing in their eyes. The leader snarled, "Enough! Kill him! Take the girls! Burn the farm!" Engines roared. Raiders charged. Elias fired again, steady despite his shaking hands. Another raider fell. He shifted, fired, moved with the stubborn precision of a man who had lived through wars long before these thugs were born. But they were many, and he was one. Then the farmhouse door slammed open. The eldest girl strode out, her blue eyes blazing. She carried only a wooden staff, but her voice rang clear. "You will not take us." The raiders faltered at the sight of her defiance. Elias shouted, "Back inside." But the girl planted her feet. For the first time in her life, she refused to run. Behind her came the others, the middle one clutching a kitchen knife, the youngest clutching Elias's cloak as if it were armor. They stood beside him, trembling but unyielding. The leader sneered. "Pathetic. You think this changes anything?" Elias raised his rifle again, but his words struck harder than bullets. "You see? They're not slaves, not cattle. They're people, and if you want them, you'll have to go through us." For a moment, silence stretched. The raiders looked at the old man, at the 3 alien girls beside him, at the stubborn fire in their eyes, and something shifted. Raiders were cowards at heart, bold only when their prey broke in fear. But here was no fear, only defiance. The leader spat on the ground. "Not worth it," he growled, signaling to his men. "Let the fool keep his pets. This farm won't last long anyway." Engines roared again as they turned back, riding off in a storm of dust and laughter. When the sound finally faded, Elias lowered his rifle, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. The girls rushed to him, their fear dissolving into something else, astonishment. "You stood for us," the middle sister whispered. Elias gave a tired smile. "I told you, you're not for sale, not ever again." The eldest bowed her head slightly, respect burning in her eyes. The youngest clung to his arm, whispering through tears. "You didn't let them take us." Elias ruffled her hair gently. "No one will, not while I'm breathing." That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth, the girls sat close around him. For the first time, the walls of the farmhouse felt like more than shelter. They felt like protection, like belonging. And though none of them said it out loud, they all felt it. The bond had deepened. They were no longer strangers tied by circumstance. They were becoming family. The morning after the raid was quiet. Too quiet. Elias sat on the porch, his rifle across his knees, staring at the horizon as if waiting for the dust clouds to return. His hands were steady, but his bones ached with the weight of age. He knew the raiders weren't gone forever. Trouble never vanished, it only circled, waiting for weakness. Behind him, the girls stirred. The youngest, silver-marked and small, padded out barefoot, clutching a cup of water in both hands. She held it out to him shyly. "You didn't sleep," she whispered. Elias gave her a tired smile and took the cup. "Neither did you." She leaned against his arm, a gesture so innocent it nearly undid him. This child, once trembling in chains, now sought comfort at his side. He drank the water slowly, his chest heavy with something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. Life on the farm shifted after that night. The girls no longer stayed apart watching from corners. They moved closer to Elias's world, asking questions, offering small hands to help. The middle sister joined him in the garden. She knelt in the dirt, her hair falling into her face as she pulled weeds with awkward determination. "Like this?" she asked, holding up a root with soil clinging to it. "Good," Elias said, his voice steady. "Don't pull too fast or you'll tear the roots." She nodded, biting her lip, and tried again. Her clumsiness made him chuckle, but there was pride in his eyes. The eldest, tall and sharp-eyed, insisted on repairing the broken fence. She swung the hammer with more strength than precision, and Elias found himself guiding her hands, showing her how to steady each nail. She resisted his help at first, bristling with pride, but gradually let him show her. By the third day, her strikes rang true, firm and sure, and the youngest, she became the shadow at his heels, following him through every chore, her silver markings glowing faintly in the twilight. She fed chickens, carried buckets half her size, and sang strange songs in a language he didn't know. Sometimes she slipped her small hand into his calloused one as though it belonged there. The neighbors whispered louder than ever. When Elias walked into the market with 3 alien girls at his side, voices hissed behind him. He bought them for pleasure. Disgusting. An old man with children. They'll betray him, just wait. Elias kept his head high, ignoring them, but the girls heard every word. That night the eldest confronted him by the fire, her blue eyes flashing. "They think you use us," she spat. "They think we are things." Elias stirred the flames with a stick, his expression calm. "Let them think what they want. Truth doesn't change because of lies," her fist clenched. "But why take this shame for us? Why not send us away?" He lifted his gaze to hers, steady as stone. "Because you deserve more than a world that calls you burdens. And because this house is less empty with you in it." The words struck her silent. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw the flicker of something soft in her eyes. Days stretched into weeks. Work was hard, but laughter began to seep into the cracks of the farmhouse. At meals, the girls no longer ate like cornered animals. They teased one another, stole bites of bread, and even teased Elias himself. "Too much salt," the middle one said one evening, wrinkling her nose at his stew. "Then next time you cook," Elias replied dryly. Hiding a smile, her eyes widened, but then she laughed, a small, real laugh. The eldest still carried her pride like armor. But sometimes Elias caught her watching him as he worked, her expression unreadable. The youngest clung to him most of all, often falling asleep against his arm, her glowing silver eyes closing in peace. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Elias sat with them outside, watching the fireflies rise from the fields. The air smelled of grass and earth, of home. The youngest broke the silence. "Elias, when you freed us, you gave us back our lives, but you also gave us something else." He looked at her, puzzled. "What's that?" She smiled faintly, her voice soft. "A family." The words hung in the air, heavier than any chain, lighter than any song. Elias's throat tightened. He had thought himself too old, too worn, too broken to ever hear such words again. The eldest shifted uncomfortably. The middle lowered her gaze, but neither argued. The truth of it was too strong. For the first time since the war had taken his wife and children long ago, Elias felt a piece of his heart mend. That night, as he lay in bed, Elias stared at the ceiling, his thoughts restless. He had bought them to free them, nothing more. But slowly, against all odds, these 3 girls had taken root in the cracks of his life. And though he didn't yet realize it, the bond they shared was not only one of family. It was something deeper, something the stars themselves seemed to witness, something that would one day become love. The morning sun was bright over the valley, painting Elias's fields in warm gold. The girls worked among the rows with him, pulling weeds, carrying water, laughing quietly. It felt almost like life had always been this way. For once, the farmhouse was not filled with fear but with the rhythm of living. But peace never lasted long. By midday, the sound of engines rolled across the valley. Not the wild roar of raiders, but the deep hum of government transports. Elias's jaw tightened as he set down his hoe. "Stay close," he told the girls. The vehicles stopped at the edge of his land. From them stepped 3 men in polished uniforms, their boots shining, their faces stern. They carried no chains, but the weight of authority clung to them like iron. The eldest girl's eyes narrowed. "Not raiders," she muttered. "Worse." The man in front introduced himself with cold formality. "Administrator Yorvin, Colonial Authority. You are Elias Thorne, correct?" Elias nodded slowly. "That's me." Jorvin's gaze flicked to the 3 alien girls standing behind Elias, their hands clenched tight, eyes wary. His lip curled faintly. "We have come to reclaim property unlawfully withheld. 3 Kailari slaves purchased illegally and not registered under trade law." The words cut like knives. Property. Slaves. The girls stiffened, fear rushing back into their faces. "They're not property," Elias said, his voice steady but edged. "I bought them, yes, but only to free them. They live here now as free as I am." Yorvin gave a cold laugh. "The law does not recognize their freedom. Without transfer papers, they remain registered assets of the trade houses. If you refuse, you will be charged with theft of property." The girls shrank back at the word theft. Once again, their lives were being decided by others. Elias stepped forward, his weathered hands gripping his cane. "Listen well, Administrator. I fought wars before you were born. I buried family under stars you'll never see. And I'll be damned if I hand these girls back into chains because a paper says they belong to someone." The soldiers shifted uneasily. Yorvin's eyes hardened. "Careful, old man. The law is the law. We can drag them from this farm by force." The eldest girl suddenly stepped out from behind Elias, her blue eyes blazing. "No. If you try, you'll face me first." Her voice trembled but held iron beneath it. The middle sister moved beside her, gripping Elias's sleeve. "And me." The youngest, though trembling, clutched Elias's cloak and whispered, "We will not go back. We will die here if we must." For a moment silence fell across the field. Elias felt his chest tighten, not with fear but with pride. They were no longer hiding behind him. They were standing with him. Yorvin's patience cracked. "Enough, soldiers, seize them." The men advanced. Elias raised his rifle with hands that no longer shook. "First step you take and one of you doesn't walk away." The soldiers froze. They were trained to follow orders, but none wanted to gamble their life against the human who looked like he'd stared death in the eye too many times. Jorvin sneered. "You think you can defy the authority? An old farmer and 3 frightened girls?" Elias's voice was low, steady, unyielding. "Not frightened anymore. And not alone." The eldest girl lifted her chin. "We are not slaves." The middle's voice followed, trembling but sure. "We are not property." The youngest whispered the last word, small but piercing. "We are family." The words struck like thunder. For the first time, doubt flickered in the soldier's eyes. Even Yorvin hesitated as though unsure whether the ground beneath him had shifted. At last, Yorvin spat. "This isn't over. The authority will return, and when we do, no speech will save you." He signaled his men, and the soldiers reluctantly withdrew, climbing back into their transports. Engines growled as they pulled away, leaving only dust and silence behind. The girls sagged with relief, their breaths shaky. The youngest clung to Elias's arm. "They'll come back," she whispered. Elias lowered his rifle, his face grim but calm. "Aye, they will. But next time we'll be ready together." The eldest studied him, her proud eyes softer now. "You defied them. For us." Elias looked at all 3 of them, his voice rough but warm. "I'd defy the whole galaxy for you." That evening they sat by the fire, the shadows dancing across their faces. For the first time, the girls didn't just sit near Elias. They sat close, shoulder to shoulder, leaning against him as though the weight of their fear was lighter when shared. The middle sister whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe we were bought with coin, but we are kept with love." Elias said nothing, but his chest swelled with an ache he thought he'd buried long ago. In the crackling firelight, he realized something deeper was taking root in this house. Not just trust, not just family, something stronger still. And the galaxy, with all its laws and cruelty, would never understand it. The days after the authorities' visit were heavy with unease. Elias could feel it in the way the valley hushed when soldiers' transports passed along distant roads, in the way neighbors looked away when he walked. Through the market, the whispers had grown. Crueler, he's hiding. Fugitives! They'll bring ruin on all of— How disgusting. An old man and alien girls under his roof. Elias ignored the words, but the girls heard them all. The youngest, silver-marked, pressed herself close to his arm in the marketplace, her eyes wide with shame. The middle sister lowered her head, refusing to look anyone in the eye. The eldest, proud and defiant, stared back at every whisperer, daring them to speak louder. By the time they returned home, the farmhouse felt smaller, more fragile. The world outside no longer carried just raiders, it carried judgment, suspicion, betrayal. That night, Elias sat sharpening his old knife by the fire. The eldest stood at the window, watching the hills as though expecting soldiers at any moment. The middle one stirred the stew in silence. The youngest curled up against Elias's knee, her voice small. Elias, what if they come back? What if they take us? He set the knife down, his weathered hand resting gently on her glowing hair. Then I'll fight until I can't stand. But I won't let them have you, the middle girl whispered. But you're only one man. Elias's gaze swept over all three of them. Then we'll stand as four. The eldest finally turned from the window, her eyes steady. You mean it? You'd fight the authority itself? He nodded once. For you. Always. From then on, the girls threw themselves into life on the farm with a fierceness Elias hadn't seen before. The eldest trained with him in the yard, swinging a wooden staff until her arms ached. Elias corrected her grip, showing her the patience of an old soldier teaching a recruit. The middle sister grew skilled in tending the garden and caring for the animals, her quiet diligence bringing food to their table. Elias often caught her humming softly as she worked, something he had never heard from her before. And the youngest shadowed him endlessly, carrying small tools, asking endless questions, slipping her hand into his as though it belonged there. Her laughter began to sound less afraid, more like sunlight breaking through clouds. They were no longer just surviving. They were preparing, but the neighbors' resentment grew sharper. One evening, Elias returned from town with bruises on his face. The girls rushed to him, horrified. What happened? The middle cried. Elias waved it off. Some men thought they'd teach me a lesson. Nothing I couldn't handle. The eldest clenched her fists. They hate us because we live. Because you gave us a place. Elias touched her shoulder, his eyes kind despite the bruise. They hate because fear is easy. But love is harder. And that's what we have here. The word silenced her anger, replacing it with something softer, something she dared not name. That night, the girls sat close around him by the fire. For the first time, none of them sat apart. They leaned against him, their warmth pressing into his sides, their eyes glowing in the dim light. The middle whispered, Elias, you gave us freedom, food, safety, but you gave us more than that. The eldest finished softly, her pride stripped bare. You gave us worth. The youngest, eyes shining, pressed closer. And love. Elias's throat tightened. He had freed them out of duty, out of defiance against a cruel galaxy. But somewhere in the quiet hours between, they had become more than strangers. More than survivors, they had become his, and he, though old and weary, had become theirs. The fire crackled. The night stretched silent, and for the first time, Elias allowed himself to wonder if what bound them together was no longer only family. It was something deeper, something fragile yet unbreakable, something the authority would never understand. The dawn was red when the sound of engines returned, louder than before. The ground trembled as not just one transport but several rolled into the valley. Soldiers in black armor marched out in formation, rifles gleaming in the morning light. Formation, rifles gleaming in the morning light. The eldest spotted them first from the porch. They've come back, she said grimly. Elias gripped his cane and stood, his heart heavy but his eyes steady. I knew they would. The middle sister's hands shook as she carried the youngest inside. But the little one pushed away, her silver markings glowing faintly. No, I won't hide. Elias's chest swelled with pride and worry. He touched her cheek gently. Then stay close to me. The authority's leader, Administrator Yorvin, stepped forward, his polished boots crunching on the dirt path. Behind him, rows of soldiers raised their rifles. Elias Thorne, Yorvin's voice carried like thunder. By order of the colonial authority, you are charged with theft of registered property. Surrender the Kailari assets now. or this farm will be reduced to ash. The eldest moved to Elias's side, her chin raised. We are not assets, she shouted. The soldiers murmured, unsettled by her defiance. Elias raised his rifle, the old weapon steady in his hands. You heard her. They're free. And if you try to take them, you'll have to kill me first. Jorvin's sneer deepened. Very well. He raised his hand. Seize them. The soldiers advanced in unison, boots pounding the dirt. The eldest grabbed her staff, planting her feet beside Elias. The middle sister clutched a kitchen blade, her voice trembling but firm. The youngest stood in front of them all, glowing faintly in the rising sun. Elias's voice was low but steady. Stay behind me, but the youngest shook her head. No, we stand together. The first soldier reached them. Elias's rifle cracked, dropping him before he touched the girls. The eldest swung her staff, striking another across the jaw. The middle slashed wildly, forcing a soldier back. The youngest closed her eyes, her chest rising as if filled with fire. Then her voice erupted. Not words of fear this time, but words of power, clear, sharp, and commanding. The strange, melodic language poured from her lips, shaking the very air. The soldiers froze mid-step, their rifles trembling in their hands. Even Jorvin staggered back, his eyes wide with shock. What is she? He whispered. The eldest shouted over the chaos, her voice fierce. She is not yours to name. Elias fought with the strength of a man far younger, his rifle booming again and again, but it was the girls who turned the tide. The eldest struck with unyielding pride, the middle defended with quiet courage, and the youngest's voice rippled through the valley like thunder, driving soldiers to their knees. The authorities' formation broke. Men fled, others dropped their weapons, some covered their ears in terror. Jorvin, red with rage, drew his pistol and aimed at Elias. Enough, old fool, you'll die for this. The shot rang, but the eldest leapt forward, knocking Elias aside. The bullet grazed her shoulder, burning through her flesh. She stumbled but did not fall. Her eyes blazed with fury. You will not harm him. The youngest's voice rose again, sharp and final. Jorvin's pistol clattered from his hand. He fell to his knees, trembling under the weight of a force he could not understand. The soldiers, seeing their leader broken, fled into the transports. Engines roared, and soon the valley was empty once more. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fire in the fields. Elias dropped to his knees beside the eldest, pressing his hands against her wound. You shouldn't have. His voice broke. She gritted her teeth, her blue eyes soft despite the pain. You saved us once. It was my turn. The middle and youngest clung to him, their eyes wet with tears. We stood together, the youngest whispered. Elias looked at them all, his chest heaving. He realized then what bound them was no longer chance, no longer just defiance. It was love, fierce, unshakable, undeniable. That night the farmhouse stood battered but alive. The girls sat close around Elias, their heads resting on his shoulders, their eyes glowing in the firelight. The eldest's wound was bound. The middle's hand still shook from battle, and the youngest's voice was hoarse from power. But none of them looked afraid anymore. Elias gazed at them, his heart heavy and full. You were never property, never burdens. You are my family, and I will stand with you until my last breath. The girls leaned closer, their voices soft but strong. And we will stand with you. For the first time in years, Elias allowed himself to believe in tomorrow.